I'm Sarah Goldvine, and this is Let's Talk Housing, a podcast by BC Housing. In this space, we explore the complex systemic issues that make it challenging for many people in British Columbia to access and afford a home. The provincial government has an ambitious plan with the largest investment in housing affordability in BC's history. Tasked with helping deliver on this plan is BC Housing, which is working with hundreds of partners to develop, manage, and administer a wide range of affordable housing and homelessness services in hundreds of communities across the province. In this podcast, you'll hear from those delivering innovative and exciting affordable housing solutions. Hello, I'm Sarah Goldvine, and welcome to Let's Talk Housing. Today, we're going to talk about designing for accessibility. As we begin today's conversation, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today, and we're recording this podcast from the ancestral and unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We offer respect to their peoples, past and present. On today's podcast, we're going to be talking about accessibility in housing. There's many types of people who have many types of housing needs, whether those are seniors, people with disabilities, and disabled people. And these are just some of the people that BC Housing helps with homes that are designed or adapted to make it easier for them to live and participate fully in their communities. Joining us today to talk more about designing for accessibility and inclusion in BC Housing projects are Darby Lee Young of Level Playing Field and Brad Tone with VRS Communities, a not-for-profit organization that serves people with disabilities as well as seniors and families. Welcome, Darby and Brad. I'd like to start today's conversation by setting a bit of context. We know that there are many people in Canada living with disabilities. More than 6 million Canadians over the age of 15 are estimated to be living with one or more disabilities. Darby, can you start us off just by talking about how important it is for housing, how important housing is for the creation of more inclusive communities?
Thanks for the question. I think the biggest thing that we see is the fact that we forget that everyone is actually temporarily able-bodied, because sooner or later you're actually going to end up like myself with cerebral palsy, or like because of a sports injury, stepping off the curb of the sidewalk, just of age. You're only temporarily able-bodied, and as soon as you're able to go into housing or of any sort of circumstance, you lose that ability to have your independence. So if we design spaces so that people at any given time, whether it's permanent or temporarily, that they can use the space, then it makes it more safe and engaging and allows people for their independence. I think housing in general for us and for myself is it allows us to be equal members of society and be involved in communities and be seen and be able to enjoy the spaces and get out and be comfy at home, but also have the ability to be engaged with the community and be involved and enjoy life as it is.
Such housing is so important for that quality of life. So for everyone. So in particular for we need to ensure that people with disabilities have access to that same quality of life. And we have Brad here, and of course Brad with VRS Communities. That's part of what you do every day. Can you tell us a little bit about VRS and what you do to help provide housing for people who need it?
Yeah, interesting organization. So VRS has been around for 50 years now. We've got over 1,600 units that are housing seniors, families, individuals, persons with disabilities. We have children's group homes, housing everyone from 3 to 103. So there's affordability categories. There is and a very strong emphasis from our society on accessible housing and the continuum that goes with that. So a large part of what we do is we marry the housing needs, the accessible housing needs, with programs. I'll give you an example of kind of a fun thing. Just coming in this morning, walking into the building, we have an adult program in the base of our building, and all of the people that had come into the program today were in the sunroom, and the sunroom gives them a number of opportunities of things to do. So it's about creating opportunities. That's our purpose here, is allowing people to adapt as they need to adapt. And I personally, I think that adaptation is the secret to a long life, and that's what we're trying to do here. Is we're just part of it. We're just trying to help any way we can, and honestly learn as we go along.
And Brad, you mentioned the importance of adapting. So I'd like to dig into that a little bit more, and maybe Darby, you can reflect on this. Is you've been active on many of these issues around accessibility for quite some time, and for our guests, especially for those who are listening on audio, you yourself have cerebral palsy. You use a scooter. Maybe you can tell us just a little bit about, as somebody who brings that lived expertise as well as professional expertise, how do you bring those together? And tell us a little bit about the types of barriers that need to be addressed so that housing can adapt to the needs of folks.
Well, I think, for me, the thing is when we build housing, and I think Brad would probably agree to this, is that a lot of the times we build it to code. And we don't actually speak to how everybody lives. So as Brad was talking about the different age groups and everybody that's within what they do, he's correct. And when we build just a code, we don't actually speak to all those different age groups and individuals and seniors and everyone and myself. And being a scooter user, my turning radius, for example, is a lot larger than it would be for a manual chair, which is where the building code has been built on. I don't have a 1,500 turning radius if I want to go into a room or a bathroom or stuff like that. 90-degree turns are somewhat difficult. So a lot of the times we forget that aspect and just build to code. And when it comes to adaptability, we have to think outside the box. And I've always said that universal design and good design does cost money, but good design does cost money. But the fact of the matter is when we do it correctly the first time, then we can actually include everyone. And by making housing more universal, then we have that wide range for people to grow within their communities. I love the sunroom idea. I'd love to see it, Brad, because, those are the good times. Because we also forget, too, that there's mental health as much as we shy away from it. When you've got friends around and stuff like that, you enjoy life a lot better. By making changes to housing, whether it's washrooms, which are always the biggest one, roll-in showers or step-in showers. I don't need a roll-in shower, but I definitely can't do a tub shower combo unless you want to make that a YouTube channel trying to climb in and out. Just sort of like riding a bike. You're not going to find me on a bike unless we do a YouTube channel too, because that would be an adventure. But the little things, I think, is what we forget, and in how we're able to adapt spaces so that if somebody is in a mobility device and they need lower counters, then we, make changes so that the counters can be lowered. If somebody just has vision loss and they don't necessarily need the lower counters, then we can leave them higher. If the units are designed so that they can be adaptable, then there's definitely changes that can happen to make it a more safe and enjoyable environment for people.
Yeah, you've touched on so much there. Maybe, and you mentioned universal design. Darby, can you tell us a little bit more about what universal design is, and in particular, what changes when you can come in at the beginning in the planning stages of a project to bring that perspective?
Well, I think universal design has the 7 principles to it, and the different 7 principles apply to different people in different ways. For me, number 6 of the 7 is low physical effort. And I think that's a big one for a lot of people, where if I've only got so much in my battery bank a day, I've got so much energy compared to somebody who's able-bodied. And if I have to spend time trying to get into a space, or the effort going to an event or so on, that all takes battery power. And so if we're able to avoid using unnecessarily power, then I can enjoy the space better, for sure. So universal design, the 7 principles are a key element. But a lot of the times too, there's even number 5, tolerance for error, that people don't necessarily understand what that means and what that looks like when they're designing buildings. When we get early into projects, we can make sure that the suites are adaptable, that they are universal, and that they do have the proper turning radiuses and pathways and all that type of stuff. Versus if we come in late, then sometimes it's not cost effective. And it's always easier to change stuff on paper. It's not cost effective to go in and fix something once it's built. So trying to avoid it's built, now how do we make it accessible, doesn't really work. So trying to apply the universal principles, but also the lived experience, the knowledge, and sort of what people are doing on a day-to-day basis would make the space a lot more enjoyable. And it's a lot easier done on paper than it is built.
Brad, how do you make that work for VRS's projects? How do you design for accessibility, and what do you consider?
I think that, Darby, you and I have a similar experience that way. We have all sorts of different approaches to designing accessible housing. Some of them result from the fact that we have partnerships. Some of them are that we've got existing buildings that we're having to work with. And as an architect, I always say exactly what you said. It's a lot easier to do it on paper. It doesn't cost you anything. Just keep spinning the conjectures until you get it right, because doing it out on the site is just kind of a failure. And we try and avoid that. So what we'll do is that we'll take an economic model, and we'll work inside those parameters. Sometimes we've got templates that are only 525 square feet for a 1-bedroom suite, for example. Sometimes we can, magically find an economic model that works at 650 or 700. And that tells us that we've got different opportunities in those units, and we do the best with what we have. It's always a process of making those decisions as we go along the way. I'm going to talk a little bit today about Legion's Veterans Village, because it's an interesting one in that it is a partnership with the private sector and also the Legion in Surrey. The Center of Excellence is involved in that project, and we came in very late in the exercise, as you mentioned. And I had some templates that were narrow and deep to work with, and we just really did some magic with them. And the only way we can do that magic is by listening to our tenants, listening to their needs, understanding what is important and what is not important. And, we have a kind of a wish list of things that we work through, but it's always a give and take. And I'm making those decisions on paper early on. One of the resources that we bring to the table for the private sector is similar to what you do, is that, I'll get in and I actually draw these things. I design the plans and get those on the table early, help the architects, help the development teams. And inevitably we end up with things that are not always perfect, but pretty good. And we pat ourselves on the back for getting the housing built. And we try very hard to then marry those units that we do build with our shared care programs, with rehab facilities, with the types of things that we can bring as resources to our tenants. Some of them are there for a short time. Some of them are there for a very, very long time. And it's a fascinating field. But every solution that we come up with is dependent on the context that we're developing under.
Yeah. So I'd love to dig in a little bit more with the Valerie. And so, Brad, maybe you can just talk to us a little bit. You talked about having those templates. So I'm assuming you mean like long and skinny floor plans. So if you're given a long and skinny floor plan and you need to make that accessible, how did you make that work for the Valerie, which if I've got this right, that's about 92 affordable and accessible rental homes. So that's a pretty big development. What does that look like?
So the 92 units is part of actually about 300 units. So there is actually a market component to this project, as well as having all of the Legion facilities and the Center of Excellence down on the main floor. And this is right in Surrey Central. Great site. You can look out the window and watch the BC Lions practicing. Great environment, great community to be in, new community. We come to the table with a project like this. Now we came in very, very late in the exercise, and as I said, we had a number of templates that I could use. I mean, the building for the most part had been designed. I couldn't work with the units that were in the core tower because they didn't really facilitate our accessible needs. But I did find 10 what were narrow, long units in the podium of the building that we then modified. And they're kind of interesting. We do things like, getting back to what Darby was saying about turning radiuses. So, we come in a door in a unit in the front door. Now we have an auto door opener on that, and we're very careful about how we open those doors and how accessible they are. But we don't necessarily just stick to a 1,500 millimeter turning radius. We'll come in and we'll say, well, look, that space is probably useful for a little office or something. Let's make it a little bit bigger, put a workstation in it. Actually, maybe we'll access our wheel-in washroom off of that space so that there's a lot of room. You've got straight runs through the doors, through pocket doors. You're not turning a lot of corners. The long unit plan obviously had a corridor down the middle of it. So what do we do with that? Well, we widen it out and we put the kitchen along that plan. We have double sets of wide doors going into the bedroom that can be left open so that you've got open space. And making the most of the 600 square feet that we had, we've got units there now that I think are going to be very healthy to live in and very livable. But it's not optimal. But we're still happy with that. This is not uncommon in the development industry to work with these sorts of parameters. Well, you can do it with accessible housing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting example. And of course, Darby, you're working on a BC housing project, one that's much earlier in development, called Skeena Terrace, and that's in Vancouver. And so for our listeners, this is currently it's primarily family townhome development that's going through redevelopment. So it's going to be changing a lot in the coming years. Can you tell us a little bit, Darby, about what your advice is around that project, and particularly given that you're able to provide that advice earlier in the development and planning stage?
Yeah, I think with Skeena Terrace, it's a very interesting and challenging one, because anybody that's seen the land and the area where Skeena Terrace is it's very hilly. So we've got a lot of, I wouldn't necessarily call them issues, but we've got some scenarios there where we're trying to figure out the best way forward so that people can go to the bus stops, can go to the different community, like the community hub, where people are going to live, how all those different suites are going to look like. and making sure that everyone feels that it is warm and welcome. We're right at the very beginning stages of this project, so we're able to incorporate the accessibility aspects. So looking at even where we're aligning the buildings and what that sort of looks like from a flow standpoint, parking, pathways, all that type of stuff. And hopefully we're able to influence it enough that council agrees with the direction of which Skeena Terrace is going. It's been a ton of fun in working through these challenges, and it's great when we've got a team of people, not only from BC Housing, but the city, from the architects to everybody involved, to making sure that everybody understands the importance of accessibility. Because I think one of the biggest things that we run into is that nobody fully understands the importance, or they say, well, we're building to code, we're good. And so having this team that we've got with Skeena and everybody involved, understanding that they really want to make this the go-to project, and how we can make successful communities in making sure that everybody feels warm and welcome.
Brad, we were talking a little bit earlier before we got going today about about opportunities for young professionals around designing accessible housing. We have some folks like that who listen to the podcast. What type of advice would you provide to somebody who's interested in a career in development around opportunities around accessible housing?
When I graduated, my heart was connected to public housing, was connected to man and his environment and the community. And I got out into the field, worked not only as an architect, but also as a developer. I started working with the nonprofit sector and developed 8 projects around BC with a partner. Passionately involved in what I was doing. All the while along, I was volunteering with VRS. It's been a great career. I mean, it's really meaningful, and all of these sorts of things have to have meaning if it's going to sustain your interests. I encourage young architects to learn a little bit more about accessible housing, because everything that we do going forward has got to be seamless this way. And you have to have a knowledge base and an understanding. You have to see the opportunities there. And they get proven out. I'm going to give you one little, just kind of an odd example of things. We just did a project in North Vancouver where we had a kind of a lay-by or parking area that, for buses to drop some of our tenants off. And we negotiated that with the city of North Vancouver. What we did is we widened out the sidewalk and we kind of made it like a little courtyard right on the street. I was there the other night, and there was 3 of our tenants in wheelchairs all out on the street. Now, we have a beautiful community room in the back and a garden, but they wanted to be down on the street. And they had basically begun to reuse what was something that might have been intended for parking and access, but they're using it in a community way. And I love that. Every time I go there, I can sit down and talk to these people, and we share stories, and great field to be in. I encourage young architects to put it on their wish list. One more thing that you've got to learn in your hopefully long career.
If I can add to it, I'm actually a course instructor for U of C, so University of Calgary here in town. So we're starting to see some of the universities also put in, winter studios and block weeks, the importance of accessibility. So if those junior or students of architecture are listening, I highly recommend even reaching out to the university and requesting studios or block week sessions on universal design and accessibility, whether it's housing, whether it's commercial or big built environment projects like the convention centers and sports arenas, but actually pushing the doors of the universities to bring in that education. But always remember too that accessibility is a living document, as we call it, and so is disability and all that type of stuff, and it's forever changing. Some days it can change by the week, some days it can change by the month. It's always forever changing, and so you can never stop learning about the uniqueness of how everybody lives.
That's so true, Darby. So, given that this is always changing, if you think ahead 5 or 10 years, what would your hopes be for accessible housing? Where do you hope we are?
I would hope that in 5 to 10 years, I could wheel up and get a place that works for me, instead of getting a place and then having to spend a ton of time and effort trying to modify it, or more so begging somebody to make the changes so that I can live in that space. Because we see it in every day. It's not just in housing. I'm trying to get a new car and I'm begging the dealerships and the car makers for changes to my car. And I shouldn't have to do that. I should be able to just wheel into a dealership and be like, okay, I want this car today. Thank you. I'm going to lease this and we're going to add this to it to make it easy so that I can drive it. Thanks. It should be the same in housing where you wheel in if it's brand new or it's still on paper, be like, okay, so these are the accessibility features I want to put into my new house being built or my new place being built. And instead today, it's like you go in and be like, I need this, this, and this. And they're like, well, what? Like, no. Like, do you know that it costs money? Like, that's sort of the mindset that we have today. So hopefully in 5 to 10 years, I can wheel up and be like, okay, I want this, this, and this in my house. And it's like, yep, no problem. Checkbox, or I can find places that are modified and that we get away from, making sure front entries don't have stairs and like the smaller details, but make a bigger impact for all of us.
That's a great place to wrap today. I really want to thank Darby and Brad for joining us today. This has been a really, really inspiring conversation. Thank you so much. Let's talk again soon. To learn more about BC Housing or to apply for subsidized housing in British Columbia, visit our website at bchousing.org.